A spacecraft launched in the late 1970s was not supposed to create suspense in the 21st century. For decades it traveled around the sun, far from headlines, far from the people who built it. Then its path brought it back toward Earth. On trajectory maps, the curve was easy to see. A long loop through space, bending once again toward the planet it had left behind. The spacecraft was called ISEE-3. And suddenly an impossible question appeared. If a spacecraft from another era came back, could anyone take it home? At first, the problem seemed simple. The craft had survived. That alone was unexpected. Somewhere beyond Earth, a machine designed during the age of slide rules and room-sized computers was still moving through space. The opportunity was visible on every orbital diagram. The spacecraft was coming close enough to matter again. Only one uncertainty seemed to stand in the way. Was it still alive? As the return approached, antennas turned toward the sky. Signals arrived. A faint transmission crossed the distance and reached Earth. The spacecraft was still talking. The image changed immediately. What had looked like a relic now looked like a functioning spacecraft. The return window no longer felt theoretical. For a moment, recovery seemed possible. Yet the trajectory on the screen kept moving. The spacecraft was approaching Earth, but the opportunity attached to that approach was already shrinking, because surviving was only part of the story. The world that once operated ISEE-3 had largely disappeared. The mission had been handed off, renamed, repurposed, and eventually left behind. The engineers who knew its systems had retired. The equipment used to communicate with it belonged to another technological generation. The spacecraft had returned. Its support ecosystem had not. NASA allowed an independent team to attempt something unusual. If they could rebuild the ability to communicate with the spacecraft, they could try to recover it. Suddenly, the challenge no longer centered on a machine millions of miles away. It centered on Earth. Old documents had to be found. Command methods had to be recreated. Communication pathways once handled by institutions had to be assembled again from pieces scattered across decades. The spacecraft remained visible on its path through space. The question was whether the modern world could remember how to speak its language before the opportunity disappeared. Meanwhile, the orbital window continued to narrow. Every day the geometry changed. Every day removed maneuver options that had existed before. The path back remained open, just not forever. Then came the breakthrough. Signals were received consistently. Telemetry returned. Commands were transmitted. The spacecraft answered. After decades in space, ISEE-3 was responding to people on Earth. Ground antennas tracked the signal. Computer displays filled with data. The distance between past and present suddenly seemed smaller than anyone expected. For a moment, the story appeared to have found its answer. The spacecraft survived. Communication worked. NASA had permitted the attempt. A team had rebuilt the missing connection. What else could recovery require? The trajectory provided the next clue. Simply talking to the spacecraft would not change where it was going. To recover the mission, the spacecraft needed to perform a maneuver. Its thrusters had to fire. Its path had to change. The challenge that had seemed impossible, reestablishing contact, was no longer the final test. It was only the doorway to the final test. The team prepared commands. Telemetry streams were watched carefully.
Proceeding to phase 2
The maneuver would reveal something communication alone could not. Whether the spacecraft could still act. The commands went out. On Earth, operators waited for the evidence that the spacecraft had changed its motion. The expected result never arrived. The spacecraft could hear, but hearing was not enough. The longer propulsion attempt failed to produce the maneuver required for recovery. The contradiction sat plainly in the telemetry. The spacecraft was responsive,
Telemetry confirms ignition,
yet the mission remained unrecoverable. Everything that seemed to prove success now exposed a deeper limitation. The spacecraft had survived. Its communications survived. But survival and recoverability were no longer the same thing. The orbital window kept shrinking. The path on the trajectory display continued forward whether the maneuver succeeded or not. And without the maneuver, fewer possibilities remained. The story transformed into a race against geometry itself. No amount of determination could pause the spacecraft's motion. No amount of communication could create a new orbital opportunity once the existing one passed. The disappearing element had always been the window. Now it was becoming visible. The moon approached. The spacecraft approached. Then the encounter came and went. ISEE-3 passed through the region where recovery might have happened. Trajectory visualizations that once showed possible paths back toward useful operations began showing something else. Departure. Distance started growing again. The spacecraft moved beyond the opportunity that had brought so much attention. The signal still existed. The spacecraft still survived. But the path that mattered had vanished. In the years that followed, ISEE-3 continued its journey through solar orbit. The machine endured. That fact never changed. What changed was the meaning of its survival. At the beginning, the spacecraft looked like abandoned hardware receiving an unexpected second chance. By the end, it had become evidence of something more complicated. The real obstacle was not reaching the spacecraft. People reached it. The real obstacle was rebuilding enough of a lost operational world before time removed the opportunity. A spacecraft from the 1970s returned near Earth. Signals were received. Commands were sent. Contact was restored. Yet as the craft passed the moon and continued outward once again, the image that remained was not one of a dead spacecraft drifting silently into space. It was a living spacecraft continuing its journey while the chance to recover it slipped away behind it. The machine survived. The opportunity did not.